Everyone who's joined us, thank you so much. I'm Paul Caratona, an Assistant Director with UNH and Alumni Relations. We appreciate you joining our webinar, The 5 Fear-Based Mistakes Leaders Make in a Crisis. This webinar is part of our Alumni Relations series. We have more webinars scheduled throughout June and hope you will join us for a future program. For those who would like to view the webinar again or share with others, all of our webinars are recorded and can be viewed on our website. We'll be sending out a link after this presentation with links from the presenters and also a link to the recording. Our host today is Patrick Sweeney from the class of '89. Patrick is an entrepreneur, angel investor, and world record holder. His book, Fear is Fuel, was ranked number 5 on the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list. We are also joined by Neil Nyman, the Associate Director of Academic Programs with the Paul College of Business and Economics, who will be helping Patrick facilitate his webinar today. Questions are encouraged and will be taken throughout the entire webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, please check out the Zoom Q&A feature and submit your questions through that feature. Thank you all again for joining, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Patrick and Neil.
Thanks, Paul. And Neil, thanks a million for joining us today. I'm excited to have a good conversation with you. I'm Patrick Sweeney. As Paul just mentioned, I've been CEO of 4 different companies. One of them I led through a pretty big crisis after 9/11, and we came out even stronger and had a bigger success and in better position than we were in, and then led another one through the economic crisis back in 2006, 2008. So I've seen a lot of mistakes and made a ton of mistakes myself. Also spent 6 years researching the neuroscience of fear for the book Fear is Fuel. So what we're going to do today is walk through those 5 mistakes, and then I'm going to give you a little helpful neuroscience. So let's start out with the helpful neuroscience, because this is important right from the start. So if we can have the first question up, I'm going to engage all of you with a poll, and the poll is to rate your ability to multitask. And this is going to be a little bit of neuroscience here. Go ahead and vote and give us your answer. And while we're waiting for the results, Neil, tell me where you'd rank on these 3 choices here.
Well, here's a challenge, Patrick. So I'm familiar with the neuroscience, and I've seen a lot of the studies. And let me just take a moment and say that I've known Patrick forever. He was a student of mine when he was an undergrad, which lets you know how long I've been at UNH. But I already know that most students think that they're juggling geniuses and can do many things at one time. And all the literature I've seen says, no way.
Exactly. How'd we do, JC, on the results, or Phoebe? There you go. So we have a smattering of undergrads here, apparently. Neil is exactly right. And one of the studies that he's probably seen is a neuroscientist from MIT named Earl Miller. Earl did a tremendous amount of research on multitasking. And what he found is that it literally takes your brain almost a second to switch from one subject to another. So if you're listening and you're looking at email, it takes you literally a second to switch from one to the other. And then to figure out where you were before, you actually have to rewind a little bit. So there is no such thing as multitasking, and it's actually referred to by neuroscientists as multi-switching. So if you want to get the most out of the webinar or your classes or anything like that, make sure you're just focused like that bottom, what do we have there? Bottom 32% or so who focus on one thing. So Neil knew the neuroscience before, but it's another great testament of what the research that we've only had the technology to look in the brain over the past maybe 10 years or so. Now, back to the title of what we're doing, the mistakes leaders make. One of the things that happens in the crisis, Bain actually did a longitudinal study of more than 700 companies over the course of the past 10 big economic crises. And what they found was in the top quartile, after a crisis, 25% of the companies up there were brand new. And the other shocking thing that they found, the bottom quartile was made up of 20% of companies that actually used to be in the very top. So in a time of crisis, if you're one of those companies or one of those leaders who's saying, I'm going to wait till this is over to figure things out, to see how everything lets out, then you're going to be screwed, because everyone else who's taking advantage of this crisis as an opportunity to innovate aren't falling back on their primal survival mechanisms, which is the programming in our brain. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's really whether or not you want to face your fear and learn how to use it. Because what happens in our brain is our brain's a prediction engine. And we try to predict the outcome of nearly every event. And this is literally a 2 million-year-old piece of software sitting on a gland in our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's our primal warning, our initial defenses. So when we were cavemen 2 million years ago, we might look across and think that maybe across that wonderful landscape is Eden, but we've got this dark, dingy cave and we know it's safe. So we'd fly back to the cave, we'd retreat to our cave because we felt more empowered there. We were able to handle the uncertainty that happens when our brain stops predicting things. So just to give you an example, the way that the brain is a prediction engine, it's doing this all the time as we're waking subconsciously. You walk into a room and you think, I'm gonna flip on the light switch, and if I do, there's a 95% chance the light's gonna come on, and maybe a 5% chance it won't come on. If it doesn't come on, then your brain thinks, okay, there's an 88% chance the light bulb's burnt out. There's a 12% chance the circuit breaker is flipped off. And so we're constantly predicting based on something called our prior beliefs. And our prior beliefs is everything that happened to us throughout our life, our past experiences, and they get put into this massive hard drive that's called our subconscious. And that's what we use to predict things. So anything that's different, anything that veers from our prior beliefs creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates a feeling of disempowerment. And that creates something that says to our initial software back there, we could die. There's a threat to us, so we have to fight, flight, or freeze. And that's the amygdala. That's our early warning system. That's what we default to in any kind of chaotic situation. So the prediction engine that our brain is filtered through our past experiences. And if we hold on to those, we're no better than the caveman. We're no better than going back to our dark, dingy cave just because we feel uncertain. And uncertainty creates this amazing cocktail within our body. When the amygdala switches on and tries to send us into fight, flight, or freeze, we produce all these enzymes, cortisol, DHEA, adrenaline, and it's a fear cocktail that starts going through our body, and we feel it with butterflies, or maybe our jaw getting tight, or our palms getting sweaty, our mouth getting dry. And that fear cocktail helps us to do amazing things. You've heard about a story of a 130-pound woman who could pick up a car to save her son who's trapped underneath it. That's because the amygdala has switched on that fear cocktail. We get smarter and we get stronger. So if we can learn to use that, if we can leverage that change in our body and lean into it, one of the things that we'll find is all of our dreams are on the other side of fear. If we keep defaulting back to our cave, then we're never going to find all of our dreams. And that's actually where prejudice comes from. It's where judgment comes from. Because in times of uncertainty, we become more extreme versions of ourselves. So with that, I'm going to stop for 2 seconds and ask Neil what he's seen in sort of this time of uncertainty from the business and economics perspective, and how the world you think has changed because of the uncertainty we're facing.
Well, it's really interesting, Patrick, because, you look at Main Street and you look at the financial markets, and there's this huge disconnect where investors are thinking, oh, there's nothing to fear, and the stock market is just going gaga, which I guess just shows you what free money will do, right? You throw enough money at a problem, and people are just saying things that have to work out right. But I feel really bad. There's 40 million Americans that are unemployed right now, and they've got to be trapped by fear, and they don't have a lot of choice, a lot of options. There are a lot of businesses that aren't going to come back after this mega shutdown, and there are a lot of individuals who are now going, oh, what's going to happen when all this government money runs out and my job isn't there any longer? Am I going to find another job? And I can see it creating a lot of anger in people going, hey, this is unfair. I had a great job. The economy was doing well. And then all of a sudden you put everything on pause, and now it's not, we're off pause, and hey, the world has changed, and where's my place? And it's a scary time, Patrick.
Well, you know, Neil, the interesting part of that from a neuroscience perspective is when we get afraid, anger is one of the emotions that can be driven by fear. And when that amygdala switches on, so we've got two parts of our brain that are important to know. The amygdala, which handles the fight, flight, or freeze response, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is a relatively newer part of our brain. It's about 50,000 years old. That handles the adult supervision. And in fact, it's not fully developed until we're in our early 20s. The amygdala is fully developed at birth, actually even before birth. In the third trimester, we have the ability to default to defense. We can fight, flight, or freeze coming out the womb. And in fact, kids, most people don't realize this, kids come out mean, angry, prejudiced, and judgmental. And the most aggressive they are is at between 4 and 6 years old, according to research from the University of Montreal. So in fact, kids don't come out this perfect, beautiful, loving creature. They come out with the ability to try and survive the best they can in the wild and survive just for themselves. So we have to teach them, to be open, to be curious, to be in awe of things instead of being judgmental. Because if they weren't, they'd look at what their tribe is. And one of the things, you know, you bring up a point that's interesting, Neil. I mentioned our prior beliefs, and I'll get to the 5 mistakes in just a second. But one of the things about our prior beliefs that's really messed up is we don't populate our database. So the bizarre thing is we don't choose where we're born. We don't choose what language we speak, the color of our skin, how many brothers and sisters we have, where we go to elementary school. All of that is chosen for us, yet that becomes our initial point of reference, literally for the first 20 years of our life. That becomes what we use to make all of our predictions. So if somebody looks different, then that's going to be uncertainty to us. That's going to be a threat. And when your amygdala activates, you lose anything that's non-essential. Like you stop digesting, and one of the most important things you stop empathy. And this is what we're seeing going on right now, because politicians are using fear as a tool to try and get us to act in a way that they want to. So it's creating fear, and it's also eliminating the ability to be empathetic towards other people. So people are losing jobs, putting yourself in their situation, and certainly all the fallout from the George Floyd tragedy. So we've seen that, and there's a good neuroscience example for that. But a quick question, Neil, do we have any questions teed up before I get into the 5 mistakes?
Nope, you can keep going, Patrick.
Okay. All right, so the 5 mistakes, we'll start out with this first one. And this can be applied anytime in your life, and it's choosing either fear or opportunity. So if you look at every decision you've ever made in your life, you can boil it down to either the decision being based on opportunity or the decision being based on fear. And your prior beliefs are usually what drives that. If you make a decision based on fear, it almost always leads to regret, to shame, and to failure. If you make a decision based on opportunity, it almost always leads to growth, to happiness, to success, to fulfillment. And one thing most people don't know, a lot of you have probably heard about the amygdala, that thing that I talked about with that 2 million-year-old piece of software there. But what you probably haven't heard about is there's another part of our brain called the SGACC, the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex. That's our courage center. So we have an amygdala that's with us for most of our life. We have a courage center that doesn't really develop until we're in our teens, and then is fully developed in our early 20s. And we can literally switch between one or the other. And there was a brilliant experiment at the University of Israel. And what they did was they surveyed a bunch of people to find a group of participants who were afraid of snakes. And they put them in an MRI machine, a functional MRI machine. So this giant metallic coffin, basically. And it's open on both ends. Now, these people already admitted they were afraid of snakes. They're lying in this metallic box. They've got a mirror up above their head where they can see behind them. Behind them is a railroad track like this, an electronic railroad track. On the railroad track, about 15 feet away, is a carton with a snake on it. And they were told to either press the button to move it away or press the button to bring it closer. And the goal was to bring it as close to your face as you possibly could. And they're sitting there watching. Now, these are people who already admitted they were terrified of snakes. And what they found was absolutely amazing. So at the start of the experiment, across the board, everyone's amygdala was activated. They were all scared. And about 20 to 25% of the people brought the snake closer to them. And when they did, their amygdala shut off and their courage center, the SGACC, lit up. So that's the difference. That's what it takes for us to choose opportunity instead of choosing fear. We've got to activate it. When we feel those changes in our body, the change in physiology, because the amygdala is trying to save our life, get us back to run to our cave, what we need to do is we need to say, okay, this isn't an early warning system for defense anymore. This is an early warning system for opportunity. When I feel this fear, when I feel these changes in my body, I'm going to lean into it. I'm actually going to run towards it because I know that I can switch on that courage center. And then when you do, and you actually do something, I'm sure all of you can remember, and Neil, I'll ask you first, can you remember a time when you did something that was really scary?
Yeah, well, you know, it's not just really scary. You know, I'm sitting here listening to you, Patrick, and I'm seeing fear in my own life on a daily basis, right? I'm afraid I'm going to look stupid. I'm afraid I'm going to make a bad decision. I'm afraid I'm going to lose money. I'm afraid I'm going to be wrong. I'm afraid that people are going to think poorly of me. And I mean, the list could go on, right? And so the question is, how do you get over that so that you can activate that courage center in your body and take advantage of opportunities?
You know, it's a great question. And the method and the platform that I outline in the book is called the BASE platform, B-A-S-E. And that's an acronym. And that's after I've interviewed 36 of the world's top neuroscientists over the past 6 years. And I'll give you the two things that you can do that are really simple and that are really effective. The B in BASE, the first thing is to breathe. So one thing that happens is there's two ways our brain receives information, from outside senses and from inside the body. One is called top down, the other is called bottom up. And so when we get into a situation where we might feel, I'm going to do something stupid, I'm going to look like an idiot, we can say to ourselves, number one, what's your motivation? Because your motivation has a really key impact on how brave you can be. And then number two, I'm going to step back and I'm just going to breathe. And the method that I suggest in the book is called a 4x4. We breathe in for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, out for a count of 4. Hold it out for a count of 4. And then back in for a count of 4. So you follow that 4x4 methodology. It's the same thing Navy SEALs learn in sniper camp. They call it box breathing. It's the same thing yogis have been doing for thousands of years. And what happens is our body and our brain starts to think, if we're in trouble and we're under threat, we're going to be hyperventilating. We're going to be getting as much air in as possible. So when we do that 4x4, that's bottoms up information that tells our brain, okay, we're not really under threat. We've got the opportunity now to move forward. So it'll shut off that amygdala and it'll allow you to activate that courage center. And one of the things that I work with a lot of CEOs across the country through this organization, YPO, Young Presidents Organization. One thing I have almost all my clients doing is a morning routine. And part of the morning routine is breathing, even just for 3 or 4 minutes. You don't have to meditate and sit on a cushion for an hour. Literally, if you just do those 4x4s for 2 or 3 minutes when you wake up. First thing I do when I wake up is I thank God I'm alive and above the dirt. So you can thank Allah, you can thank the universe, you can thank Buddha, it doesn't matter. But having some gratitude when you wake up. Then you do 3 or 4 minutes of breathing so that when something stressful happens, your body, your neurons have already done that breathing a lot, and you can switch back into it and you'll go immediately to a safe place, mentally speaking. So that 4x4 is a really great way of facing the anxiety, Neil. The other thing, which is super simple, and it was done from a group of researchers at Emory University. They got a whole bunch of people, a couple hundred people, and they split them into two groups. One group was a control group. The other group, they gave a chopstick to, and they said, hold it in your mouth. Because what they wanted to do was they wanted to test the old adage of grin it, bear it. So they wanted people to smile, but they didn't tell them to smile because they were afraid they might think of something happy and skew the results. So they gave them a chopstick, which forced them to flex the 42 muscles in your face. And an amazing thing happened. They were sitting there and both groups had to watch scary movies and really traumatic stuff. And what they found was the group that had the chopstick in their mouth had an 80% reduction in cortisol, the stress hormone. So those two things are the best thing you can do. And in fact, that's why when I go out for a run or a bike in the morning now, I make sure I smile all the time. I look like Forrest Gump, you know, kind of going down the road smiling, but it gets other people to smile back at you and they're going to feel better because of that. So those two little devices are part of the base methodology I outline in the book, but they're a great way to address any uncertainty that we might be feeling.
Hey, so Pat, let me share with you a question from the audience, where somebody writes, she's surprised that her teenage children aren't more anxious during this time with COVID-19. They don't seem to have a lot of fear of the virus or what will happen next. And how would you explain that, or what would you attribute that to?
So for teenage kids, it's particularly important. I mentioned it briefly, but when I started researching this, I have 3 teenagers myself. And like I said, when I started researching it, I didn't know anything about the brain development cycle. But the kids are born with an amygdala that is there and designed to look at specific threats in their field of view. So that's all they have. They don't have the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational thought and what I call the adult supervision. So all they can do is fight, flight, or freeze. What most kids think, and certainly my kids are this way, and I think it's the same with most, is they don't see COVID-19 as a threat. They're not concerned necessarily about their jobs or any of the things that Neil had talked about. And they're not concerned that they're going to break an arm or they're going to get beat up or they're going to fail out of school, because most of their stresses, quite honestly, have been alleviated because of COVID-19. They're seeing their parents more. They're, you know, a lot of schools are on pass-fail and you know, doing just Zoom calls and that sort of thing. So for a lot of kids, the stress has been reduced because of COVID-19, and the threat doesn't necessarily seem real to them or seem imminent, which is kind of the key for activating their amygdala. So there's a big difference between how we look at this and how someone who doesn't have a prefrontal cortex looks at it. And I think that's probably the reason why.
Wow. So, so where are we going to be in the fall here at UNH, Patrick, with all the undergraduates back on campus? Do they have that prefrontal cortex developed, or are they going to be showing no fear and not social distancing?
Well, Neil, one thing I want to make clear, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I just know a ton about neuroscience. And what I do know is it's going to be different for each kid. And it's going to be different based on their prior beliefs and the experiences that they've had in their life and how they predict things. And it's also going to be different based on something called hot cognition and cold cognition. And this is where a lot of parents tend to really be tough on their kids. And you know, honestly, they get themselves in deep shit from a parenting perspective because they think their kids are adults because they're so good at cold cognition. That means when you're sitting around the table with a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, and she says, you know, I want to do this, I want to do that. And you say to yourself, wow, she's pretty rational. She's got her head screwed on right. That's a really thoughtful kid. Well, that's because it's cold cognition. There's no emotion associated. So she can make a connection between her newly developing prefrontal cortex and the rest of her nervous system because that fear cocktail isn't being produced. As soon as emotion comes into it and it becomes hot cognition, then everything comes off the rails until that connection to the prefrontal cortex, like I said, in your early 20s, is fully built. So, and that happens at different stages, and it's different between boys and girls as well. So you're going to have a whole mixed bag when it comes into the fall. But the key thing that you can do is help people feel comfortable with uncertainty. because the second point that leaders make, the second mistake, the first one was choosing fear versus opportunity. The second point is they default to the known. So I talked about running back to your cave. Well, the couch is the new cave. So when you're given an opportunity to try something new, to do something innovative, your amygdala will want you to go back to your cave. And in today's modern world, you want to get back to the couch. And that's because we're wishing or hoping instead of dealing with an actual reality and looking at how reality is. So the way to get over that is a great practice that the Stoics came up with, which is a visualization practice. So you can look at things and you can imagine how you want them to be, and you start to get comfortable with that. And then you imagine, once you're comfortable with that, and then you imagine all the things that could go wrong. And this is called the premeditation of evil. So if you look and go back to Neil's example, write down, I might lose my job, my company might go out of business. You list out all the worst case scenarios, all the possible things that could go wrong. Then you list out how you'd react and what you would do if that happened. And now what you've done, and then you try to label that emotion that you're feeling it as well. So now you've changed your future past. So remember, all the stuff that we do in our subconscious is based on our past. So it's based, we make about 80% of our decisions subconsciously. And so we're basing everything on things that we've done before. If you do this premeditation of evil, you're putting things into that database. So in the future, that becomes part of the past that you can then leverage to make a prediction of the outcome. So defaulting to the known. Now, a lot of people think that some people can do this and some people can't do this. But I want to ask you a question, another question, question number 2, to give you a little bit more neuroscience. Do you think, Phoebe, can we get that question up? There we go. Do you think you are either right brain, creative, left brain, analytical, or that you use your whole brain and you can do both?
Hey, so Patrick,
Neil,
while we're waiting for the responses of the poll, I actually have a couple other questions for you from
Sure.
some of our participants. So one of the questions is, okay, so let's operationalize this. I'm in a work environment. Let's say I've got a big presentation coming up and I'm feeling fearful about that, or my supervisor called me into the office. Oh my God, what do they want to talk to me about? I'm uncertain and fearful of that. Does one just sort of ignore the fear and just say, I'm going to soldier through it and do it? Or if I'm starting to feel fearful, is the right way to approach that for me to step back and do a breathing exercise, get myself centered, allow that other part of my brain to sort of reassert control and think through, I have nothing to be afraid of, or here are the possible things that are going to happen and here are my responses. What kind of advice would you give to somebody in that kind of situation?
So the quick advice there, Neil, on sort of a 2-second thing that anyone can remember is you get called in, or your boss is on the phone, or you get that email, whatever it is that triggers it. First, do a couple of 4x4s. Without a doubt, first step is to breathe. So you want to get control of your sympathetic nerve system again. And the second thing to do to help you engage your courage center is to say, I want to change my mindset from this being a threat to this being a challenge. Because now my body is prepped for a challenge. When you have that fear response, your blood-brain barrier opens up to your brain, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And you get more oxygen into your brain. You ignite more synapses and neurons, so you start to get better connections. So you're smarter when you're scared. You're stronger, of course. So if you can do a couple breathing exercises to take control again, and then say, I'm going to switch from a threat mindset to a challenge mindset, and this is going to be a fun challenge. And then soon you'll start to recognize that fear. And this happened to me. I spent 6 years training for the Olympics in rowing. And at the time, I was terrified of everything in my life. I was the world's biggest wimp. And I'd get on the race course and I'd feel those, they weren't butterflies, they were bats kicking around in my stomach. I mean, the first couple of really big races, I was dry heaving and throwing up and everything else. But soon I became I became able to control that and harness that feeling. That's how I finished second in the Olympic trials and raced the World Cup and everything else, because that feeling of fear became a feeling of excitement, a feeling of energy. And so if you can start to practice that, what happens is when you create that connection to your courage center, you're firing the same neurons to reach it. And the neurons that fire together will wire together. So every time you do that, it gets easier. And this is why I say to everyone out there, if you don't take anything away from this webinar except this is the most important thing. Write this down. Scare yourself every single day. Do something that gets you out of your comfort zone every single day, because you'll become comfortable feeling those changes in your body. You'll start to create the connections to your courage center, and you'll soon see that your performance is changed dramatically if you can switch to that courage. So speaking of neuroplasticity, this is it. So the people who think they're either right brain or left brain, that's an old wives' tale. So in 2013 was the first study that proved that we have no such thing as right brain, left brain versus creative. We use our whole hemisphere, and it's our prior beliefs that determine if your mom and dad gave you a box of crayons when you were a kid, or if you started taking an art class in high school, or like I did an art class at UNH, then you could become creative, and you could fire those creative neurons and synapses to use your whole brain. So the right brain, left brain is really just an old wives' tale. So I'm sorry, Neil, go ahead.
Well, the questions are pouring in, Patrick, and I want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered or whatever. We've got a few more that are sort of sitting here. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to follow through with a couple things. So somebody has a specific question about what you were just talking about with respect to the premeditation of evil, seeing the worst case things. So this person thinks that that's a good thing to do. So, you're sort of evaluating different alternatives. Okay, here's the worst case. I don't think that's going to happen. So now I can move on with my life, or that's not going to stop me from doing things. So is that a good thing to do those kinds of mental evaluations, or not really?
Oh yeah, no, sorry, Neil, if I was confusing there. I'm recommending that we premeditate evil. So I'm recommending we put everything that could possibly happen into our prior beliefs. So if you visualize, if you start out, let's say you wanted to go rock climbing, and your wife says to you, Neil, we're going to go rock climbing. I've been at the gym trying it. We're going to go up to the White Mountains. It'll be beautiful. And you're really scared about it. So the first thing you do is you sit back, you relax, and you picture climbing up this beautiful, wonderful rock at Cathedral Ledge, and seeing the view and the foliage and everything else, and it's perfect. And then the next thing you do is you see yourself going up and you fall. So what happens if you fall when you're rock climbing? Because that's what we're all afraid of. And then you think to yourself, okay, well, if I fall, I've got this climbing guide, and he's got this really expensive equipment and this good rope. And then you think, what if I got stuck and couldn't keep climbing, and ended up getting stuck on this rock and had to have a helicopter come take me out? And you think, well, if you're just stuck there, you get a free ride in a helicopter, and you ratchet up the possibilities, and then your brain will start to assign a probability to those. So it's a really good thing to premeditate evil. But you shouldn't start out with the worst things. You should start out with the easy things, with the way you want it to turn out, and then start to see all the bad things that could go wrong. Because what happens anytime we create a memory, whether it's real or whether it's visualizations, we create what's called a semantic memory, and that's just the facts. And we create an emotional memory and how we feel about it. And this has come out with a lot of the PTSD research that a guy named Scott Orr is doing at Harvard. And so you've got the semantic memory and the emotional memory, and they're stored in two different places in the brain. You can never change the semantic memory. So the facts are the facts. Neil Nyman's sitting next to the river behind the trees. Those are just the facts. But you can change the emotional memory. So the emotional memory might be, God, Neil was a hard ass when I was a professor. He kept me off the dean's list. I don't like him. But hey, this webinar has been great. He's super nice, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'm going to change that emotional memory. And so those two things, what you're doing is populating both of those the way you want them to be. So yeah, premeditating evil is a great way to prep yourself for uncertainty.
Okay, let me ask you another question because we have somebody patiently waiting. How do you control the amount of information? So this is a scary world that we live in. There's tons of cable news channels. It seems like all they want to do is say scary things. A lot of scary things going on in social media. And, you know, what do you do if you want to stay informed, but every time you try and get information about what's going on or whatever, you're getting it presented in the most scary way possible, designed to elicit a fear response.
Yeah.
I guess that's to get you to tune in more or whatever. But how do you control that information so that you stay aware of things, but you don't let it sort of overwhelm your fear responses to the point where you just can't take any action whatsoever?
Well, and I think that's crucially important for people now, Neil. And I've done, since the COVID thing started, I've done almost 30 webinars for different companies to help employees with just that. And the first and most important thing is to focus on facts, not fear. Because you can look through, there's a group that I'm involved with that did some research, and it doesn't matter if it's CNN, if it's Fox, if it's New York Times, they all have a tremendous amount of clickbait now. So they're putting things on, the old adage that they used to say in the newspaper industry, if it bleeds, it leads, meaning the more horrific it is, the more clicks it's going to get, the more energy. So they're trying to create clickbait that people are going to look at and dive into. And politicians and marketers and the press certainly use fear as a tool against us. That's why it's so important to become comfortable with fear. Now, the way that you can control it is to do what's called taking agency. When you take agency, that means you do everything that's in your power. So what I like to suggest people do, I talked a little bit about some of the CEOs I work with, is to do a morning routine. So I have 5 things I do every morning, and people can go to my website, and there's a couple blog posts and some video posts about my morning routine. But if you have a morning routine, you get up and, breathing or exercise or calisthenics, a cold shower, whatever it might be, then you're starting your day off in a very safe place because your body and your brain expect you to do the same thing every morning. So you're going to start off very much in control of how you do it. The last thing you should do is get on your phone or get on your computer. So I don't let my kids, and I don't personally get on my phone until I've been up at least an hour and a half. Mostly because I want to do my morning routine, and then I want to use that time in the morning when your neurons and your synapses have healed from the day before, have created all these new connections and have consolidated your memory. Now you're more creative and you're smarter at that time in the morning. So I want to take advantage of that. As soon as you pick up your phone, you're reacting to other people, right? Because they're sending you texts, they're sending you emails. You've got to respond to them. Even if you don't think you're going to respond, just taking in that information forces you to be reactive. So if you want to take agency, then you control everything you can control. And that's a key part of it. We can't even control our own thoughts. We can control how we respond to our thoughts, though. And we certainly can't control what Trump is going to do, what the governor is going to do, what our boss is going to do. What we can control how we react to them. So one of the things of people who are initially in this phase, I suggest getting a morning routine, and then I suggest making a list of all the things you can control. You can control your health. You can control how you treat your immune system. You can control your exercise, your sleep, your diet, all these things that you can control to help you, and all the things you can't control. When you balance those out, then you just focus on those two, and your body and your mind become much more stable together. So one of the things. Sorry, go ahead, Neil.
Well, we have a lot more questions. Maybe I can just go through some of them very quickly. What are your thoughts on apps like Brain FM that claim to mimic the brain waves to help you calm down, study, meditate, be creative? Do you recommend using apps like that?
I do. I think there's a lot of great apps out there that use binaural waves, and you can put those on when you're working, or you can put them on when you sleep. So there's different types of brain waves, and we didn't know. We actually thought brain waves were like exhaust, So people thought, well, because the neurons and synapses are firing, there is electrical thing. It's like an engine going and there's exhaust coming out. But in fact, it's just the opposite. We have wireless communication within our brain that's almost like traffic cops. They're telling which synapses to fire and everything else. So brain waves, and this is why I think we can communicate. So I've worked a lot with Navy SEALs, and if you've ever seen a team together, one person will just turn at a certain point, and it's intuition, really. It's what Danny Kahneman calls system one thinking, and they'll just split off. I think it's because their brain waves are synced up. So we've got apps now that can help you study and help you focus if you just keep them on the background. I think they're great, absolutely.
Okay, why don't you keep going, Patrick, and then I've got a couple more questions we'll cut towards the end.
Okay, let me give you a quick, since I mentioned system one thinking versus system two. What I said, we make about 80% of our decisions subconsciously. And that happens when we see a person too. We create judgment. And that's a bad thing to do. And you see it happening all the time. And just to give you an idea of how bad our subconscious can be, let's take the next question, Phoebe, if you can get it up there. It's an easy question, but it illustrates a point. So if you bought a wiffle ball bat and ball, just take a look, read the questions, and knock it out. Neil, you're a economics guy, so we'll give everyone a couple minutes to take it, and then I'll ask you for the answer.
Oh, geez. I'm worried about, I've seen these kinds of questions before, Patrick, and I know there's always just a little twist or something.
Couldn't be tougher. All right, Neil, what would you guess?
Ball. How much is the ball? Well, I would say 50 cents.
Okay, so
like everybody else.
UNH should not feel bad because Princeton and Harvard both get this, and I just did a webinar for University of Virginia last Tuesday, and everyone gets this about the same. So you're wrong.
I knew I was going to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Read the question and check the math. It's $5 more. So it's $5.25, and the other one is 25 cents. So if it's 25 cents, $5 more means it's $5.25. The two add up to $5.50. Now, most people read that quickly and let their subconscious decide, because they think, well, if it's $5 more, then that must be $5, when in fact it isn't, because $5 is $5 more than zero. So it's quick subconscious thinking that oftentimes gets us in trouble. And it also gets us in trouble in the next mistake that leaders make, if we could get the slide up for that, JC, and that is playing not to lose. So this is happening now, and I mentioned that Bain study at the beginning of the webinar about how companies shift from the very top in their industry to the very bottom, and other companies move up. A lot of that has to do with playing not to lose. And playing not to lose is driven by a phenomenon called loss aversion. So we make a lot of decisions, and Neil, I'll ask you a simple question. If I said you and I are going to flip a coin, and if it's heads, you get $1,500. If it's tails, you have to give me $1,000. Would you take that one-time bet?
Well, you know, Patrick, I read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So.
All right, there you go. So Neil's got a spoiler alert. Okay. So I should have put that one in as a question, damn it. All right, I won't let you answer then. But you know what the answer is. For the one time, what would you do? Probably not, right?
Right.
Most people would say one time they won't do it. If you ask the same question and say we're going to flip the coin and have the payout 10 times, almost everyone says yes. So the difference, and I can't remember Danny's numbers, it's between like 30% and then it goes up to 80%. And that's a phenomenon called loss aversion. And companies now are a lot of them are trying to protect what they have, to guard what they have because of this uncertainty. And it's the worst thing you could be doing right now. Once you get things stabilized, which happened for most companies within the first month of this pandemic, then you have to realize we're in a forced innovation cycle. And all good companies, if you look at Apple as an example, when they first came out with the iPhone, they had 3 different versions. They went through all this innovation back and forth. They decided on one version, they released it. That was a chaotic, very uncertain time creating the one solution. Then they saw how it would be received in the marketplace. It went through a cycle. They started to scale up and they started to take all the revenue and take advantage of their design. That was about the point when they said, okay, it's time for a forced innovation cycle again. We're going to go back into this uncertainty, into this chaos, and we're going to innovate. So that's how they normally do it. They force their own innovation. They cannibalize their design before others can. If you're running a business, you have to look at now as a forced innovation cycle. You have to realize that we don't have just one bet. We're not making one bet when we think, we're going to develop this thing and we're going to put all of our savings into making this. We've got so many bets ahead of us, right? That it's not the one-time coin flip. We've got hundreds of coin flips ahead of us. So now's the time to be innovative and to try new things. And that's exactly what Bain found in those companies that moved up to that top quartile. So Neil, let me stop there and let you get in at least another question before I hit a couple more of these points.
So we've got a question about how does this apply to what are called big existential fears, like the imposter syndrome or the fear of not living up to your potential. How do you harness those kinds of fears so that you can excel in your career?
I think it comes down to understanding where that comes from. So we literally have 3 different types of fears. I call it a terror triangle. On one side are physical fears, and that's, rock climbing, parachuting, all those type of things. On the other side are emotional fears, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. And on the bottom are instinctual fears, fear of snakes, right? Even though 10 people a year die of snake bites in the United States, there's still tons of people who are scared of them. Now, in that triangle, there's varying components of each one of those 3 basic fears. And some of those existential or emotional fears are a great example, because what you're doing is you're defaulting to defense, right? You're going back to your cave. So if you think about it from a evolutionary perspective, the reason that we want to look good is we want to mate, we want to partner. So generally when we meet someone, we basically decide we either want to mate with them or we want to kill them. And that's how our primitive brain is thinking, because it doesn't care. The amygdala doesn't care about happiness. It doesn't care about success. It doesn't care about going on vacation to Hawaii. It only cares about passing your genes on to the next generation and procreating this race. That's why it's willing to live in a cave and not go across the jungle and find the Garden of Eden. And so that fear, that imposter theory, that's the reason most people who are afraid of public speaking are afraid to get up there, because they think, well, I'm not the expert, I'm not perfect. So what you have to, the way you have to realign that is think, number one, you're not going to get rejected from your tribe anymore. So in caveman days, if you got rejected from the tribe or you got abandoned, you were dead because you couldn't survive alone. Nowadays, it feels the same, right? Because that 2 million-year-old piece of software. But we've got to change again from that threat mindset to the challenge mindset. We've got to say, okay, well, I'm going to challenge myself to do something that puts me out of my comfort zone. I'm going to challenge myself to face this imposter theory because I am good enough, because I do have something to add. I might not be an expert, but I know that one person is going to pull one really interesting thing out of this. I know that if I can convince someone, for instance, to replace their judgment with curiosity just one time, then I'm going to help them change their future past. So those existential things really all get back to that 2 million-year-old piece of software. You've got to come up with something that resonates with you to rewrite that software. One of the things that I recommend doing, and I devoted a whole chapter in the book to this, is replacing judgment with curiosity, because that rewrites your future past. And again, remember, the more times you fire that, the easier it'll be to wire that together to the Courage Center. So an example might be you walk into Starbucks, and I grew up in blue-collar Boston Irish neighborhood. And so everyone, you know, looked like me, talked like me, and that was my tribe. So all of that went into my prior beliefs. If I walk into Starbucks and I see some kid who looks like he's a victim of a drive-by piercing, my initial reaction might be, holy shit, look at that freak, right? So what I have to do is catch myself making that judgment and say, stop. Now, switch that to what can I find really amazing about that person? Well, God, he must have an incredible threshold for pain, because I could never put one of those things in my eye up there. 2, he must be super self-confident because he doesn't care about what people think. He just expresses himself. And now when you've replaced that initial judgment with this curiosity, when you go up to him, you've got a whole different engagement feeling. And now you're populating your prior beliefs with the fact that some guy with tattoos and piercing who works at Starbucks is a great guy because he gave me, you know, an extra pump of caramel. And it turns out you change your whole world by replacing those initial judgments with curiosity. So the first step in that is to try and catch yourself making those judgments. And those judgments can be about yourself. Like, oh God, I can't speak about this new project. I'm not the VP. Well, stop and say, well, what can you find good about your opportunity to speak now? Well, you know, I have been working on it for 6 months, and I know that code better than anyone else. So yeah, I do have something to add. So even if you judge yourself, it's not just judging other people. If you judge yourself, say stop and then replace it with curiosity.
Wow. Hey, so we have one more question that I've been dying to ask from one of our participants here. Any recommendations on how you can scare yourself every day safely?
Oh yeah, it's so you know, I tell this to audiences everywhere. I speak to, you know, everyone from 4,000 people at the International Franchise Association to 50 people at a YPO event, and I always tell everyone, you don't have to jump out of a plane to scare yourself. Right? Scaring yourself can be getting up, just what we were talking about, imposter theory, getting up during the lunch or dinner and making a toast. Right? That terrifies people, just the idea of doing it. Or asking out, you know, that girl at the gym that you've been looking at and smiling at for a couple weeks. There's all sorts of little things we can do to get out of our comfort zone, or going to try a stand-up paddleboard. Even though, you know, I don't like the water, it's going to be cold, I might fall in. All these things, you can find ways to scare yourself every day. Even watching a scary movie. If you don't like scary movies, watching a scary movie, or watching a YouTube video about snakes or sharks. Anything that's going to get you out of your comfort zone. And then if you can sit there and do the breathing, and then try and look at the situation, sort of step back at it and think, you know, how silly is this? I'm on my couch watching Jaws, and I'm scared. And I'm sitting here nice and safe and sound, just looking at some light pixels on a screen. And then you start to realize, well, yeah, maybe this fear is a fraud. So you can find a lot of different ways, just be creative. And if you need help, let me know, and, you know, we'll come jump out of a plane together.
Awesome. Well, hey, well, I don't know if I'm going to take you up on that one, Patrick. I'm going to have to think about it and see if I can sort of get that fear under control, because it just occurred to me, well, I don't know how I'd feel about jumping out of there.
All right, well, we'll see how that goes in the fall. All right, let me hit the last one. I think that we'll go to on the mistakes that leaders make, and that is to under-communicate. And this gets directly to that imposter theory. A lot of leaders, particularly in this time of uncertainty, have no feeling for how they should lead. They don't know what they should tell people. They don't want to tell them the wrong thing. They don't think they have the right thing. So what do? They go back to their cave, right? So that is locking yourself in your cave. And exactly what it does to your team is leave them even more uncertain and more afraid, because the person they look to for leadership hasn't even said how they feel. So in this instance, just being authentic, just talking to the people and saying, hey, listen, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I do know we're going to do 2 or 3 different things. We're going to adopt Zoom. We're going to go from home. We're going to do new KPIs, whatever it is, just communicating every single day. And one of the most important things you can do if you're running a company is let people know how long their paycheck and how long their salary is going to be coming. Because if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is sort of starts at the basic layer, that's what everyone's worried about first. You know, am I going to have a roof over my head and food? And if you let them know their salary is going to be protected, you know, at least through the summer, through the end of the year, or you got a PPP loan or you applied for one, just communicating and letting them know where, because that imposter syndrome is driven by a rejection from the tribe. They don't want to not look like the leader, so they end up changing, you know, and not saying anything so they don't say the wrong thing. And that's the worst thing you can do. So if you start to look at your team as your family, remember I talked early on about the motivation can help you be courageous. If you have an altruistic motivation, there's a woman named Abby Marsh at Georgetown University. She did a great study on people who would, you know, run into burning buildings and that sort of thing. And she found if there is an altruistic motivation, meaning it was your daughter in the building, your son, your wife, your husband, and whatever it was, and you went in for them, you had a much higher chance of being courageous. So in fact, as you'll read in the book, one of my biggest fears was always flying. And I had a really rare form of leukemia, almost died. And that changed me from being a complete wimp to being Captain Courageous. And the stories in the book, and I think, you know, a lot of people find it pretty interesting how that can change your brain so much. But when I went to Leesburg Airport to take my first flying lesson, I thought to myself, I'm doing this for my daughter. I'm doing this because I want to be that daddy who gets on a plane and isn't afraid to take her to Disney World. And what that does is it releases something called oxytocin. And that's a little, it's like your body's own laughing gas. You actually feel good for doing altruistic things. And if you've ever done something that's scary, if you were scared, like went up and jumped off a plane or made a speech and you did it, you really feel great afterwards. If you're scared and you back away and you say, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm too scared, you feel bad and you're filled with regret. So I think that's a really key component. Neil, we probably got time for one more question or any comments you might want to add here.
No, I was thinking, Patrick, it would be time for you, if there's one last thing that you want to share, what's the most important thing that people can take away from this webinar?
I think the most important thing people can take away from this webinar, Neil, is number one, scare yourself every day and do your best to replace judgment with curiosity. Because not only will that make you a great human and help you live the life you want, because remember, all your dreams are on the other side of fear. If we start to be able to handle this fear as humans, then my dream and my mission will come true, and that's world peace. Because Gandhi said it best. He said, hate isn't the enemy, fear is. Because fear is what drives all these behaviors. So if you can replace judgment with curiosity, then you're eliminating that fear. And I hope it all serves you well. I really appreciate everyone taking the time. Neil, especially you. It was great catching up again.
Hey.
Your book will be mailed shortly.
Awesome.
And,
I'm looking forward to reading it.
All right. And I think, Phoebe, we've got a slide that we can put up where people can find my social media. So the website, you can sign up for a weekly newsletter, is pjsweeney.com. All of you guys who are sitting there with your phone in your hand, go to Instagram right now, follow the Fear Guru. And if you want to get on Twitter, it's pjsweeney.com as well. And that's a link to the book. I'm more than happy. I know, you know, I can see the Q&A thing there. And I know we had a lot of questions, Neil. People want to shoot me an email or hit me up on Instagram. I'm more than happy to answer questions or help in any way I can.
Great. Thanks a lot for sharing your insights, Patrick. I thought it was a fabulous hour. And I look forward to reading the book, and hopefully everybody else will go out and buy a copy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Neil. And thanks all UNH. Go Wildcats. And hopefully I'll see everyone soon live and in person. Take care.